1915, a single cannonball shot down an airplane. It was the first time in history, and it was supposed to be impossible. You are in Serbia, near the city of Kragujevac. The Great War is carving up a continent. For the first time in human conflict, death arrives from the sky. The low drone of an engine has become the new sound of terror. And here's where the story truly begins. The man behind the cannon was Private Radoje Ljutovac. He wasn't a pilot. He wasn't a hero. He was an artilleryman in the Serbian army, and his weapon was a relic. A Turkish-made field cannon, forged years before the Wright brothers even dreamed of flight. It was designed to fire at fortresses, not at targets moving at 70 kilometers per hour, 1,000 meters above the ground. Think about that for a second. You are trying to hit a swooping bird with a rock that you have to throw from a mile away. It's not a calculated shot, it's a prayer. That morning, 3 enemy aircraft appeared in the sky. Austro-Hungarian Farman F-30 reconnaissance bombers. The official report states they were on a mission to bomb the Military Technical Institute in Kragujevac. This was the heart of Serbia's war machine. Its destruction would have been catastrophic. The order came down the line. Take cover. Do not engage. Do not reveal your position. Ammunition was scarce, more precious than a soldier's life. But some rules are meant to be broken. Ljutovac watched the planes make their pass. He saw the bombs fall. He saw the plumes of earth and smoke rise from his country. He made a decision. Defying his commander, he grabbed a single, precious shell. He ran to his cannon. He spun the elevation crank, pushing the old gun to its absolute vertical limit. He wasn't aiming at the plane. He was aiming at a point in the empty sky where the plane was going to be. A calculation made entirely in his head. His commander screamed at him to stop. His comrades took cover, certain this was a suicide mission. But Ljutovac saw only the target. He pulled the lanyard. A deafening roar. The old cannon bucked violently. The shell screamed into the thin morning air. For a long moment, nothing. The plane flew on, unscathed. And then, a tiny puff of black smoke appeared just ahead of the lead aircraft. The plane flew directly into it. It shuddered. One wing ripped away. It tilted, stalled, and began to spiral towards the earth. A silent, terrifying descent. Radoje Ljutovac had done the impossible. But when Serbian soldiers raced to the wreckage, what they found was more than just 2 enemy pilots. It was a locked leather satchel, and its contents were never meant to be seen by Serbian eyes. leather satchel. Its contents, a mystery, lay before the Serbian soldiers. You can imagine their hands trembling as they forced it open. Inside were maps, detailed and precise. They showed troop movements, artillery positions, and planned offensives. This intelligence, captured from the downed Austro-Hungarian plain, provided an unprecedented look into enemy strategy. It confirmed what the Serbians had suspected: a massive assault was imminent. The official military records from the Serbian archives describe these maps as vital intelligence. They allowed Serbian commanders to reposition forces, reinforcing weak points just hours before the attack. This wasn't just a lucky shot. It was a strategic coup. But here's where it gets interesting: the identity of the pilots. One was an Austrian officer, Baron von Klobuchar. The other, a German observer. Their mission, you see, was not just reconnaissance. It was to deliver those very plans. Think about that for a moment. Lutotovac's impossible shot didn't just bring down a plane. It intercepted the enemy's most critical operational orders. This single act of defiance, this one man's courage, bought Serbia precious time. How much time? The Battle of Kolubara, a pivotal moment in the Serbian campaign, began just days later. Without Lutotovac's intervention, the outcome could have been drastically different. The historical accounts of the Great War often focus on the Western Front, on the trenches and the gas attacks. But the Eastern Front, particularly the Serbian theater, saw brutal fighting. It was a war of attrition, where every small victory mattered. This specific incident, the downing of the Farman F-30 on September 30, 1915, is documented in multiple military histories. The Serbian Ministry of Defense archives contain the original reports. Yet outside of Serbia, few know the name Radoje Lutovac. Why is that? Why do certain stories fade into the background? Now, let's turn our attention to another front, thousands of kilometers away. While Lutovac was making history in the skies over Serbia, across the Atlantic, new forces were stirring. In the United States, the Great War was still a distant thunder, but the rumblings of involvement were growing louder. And here, a different kind of battle was being fought. A battle for recognition. A battle for basic human dignity. You see, the American military was segregated. Black Americans, despite their fierce patriotism, were largely relegated to service roles. They were cooks. They were laborers. They were denied the right to fight alongside their white countrymen. This was the reality of 1915 America. But then came the call to arms. The National Guard units were federalized, and among them, a regiment from New York City, the 15th New York Infantry Regiment. It was composed entirely of African American soldiers. Its commander, Colonel William Hayward, was a white officer with an unwavering belief in his men. He fought tirelessly against the systemic racism that sought to deny them their place on the battlefield. He faced resistance at every turn, from politicians, from other military leaders. They questioned the courage of black soldiers. They doubted their ability to fight. But Hayward knew better. He had seen their determination. He had witnessed their resolve. And now he was going to prove it to the world. The 15th New York Infantry Regiment, later known as the 369th Infantry Regiment, would become the Harlem Hellfighters. Their journey would take them from the streets of New York to the brutal trenches of France. But before they could even step foot on European soil, they had to overcome the prejudices of their own nation. The official narrative often skips this part. It focuses on their bravery in combat. But their fight for the right to fight was just as heroic. They were ready. They were trained. They were eager to prove their worth. But would America allow them? Would the world see them as soldiers, or just as black men in uniform? That question hung heavy in the air as they prepared to embark. Their fate and their legacy remained uncertain, and what they would face on the battlefields of Europe was beyond anything they could have imagined. and their legacy remained uncertain. The question of whether America would allow them to fight or see them as mere black men in uniform hung heavy. Now, imagine yourself on a troop transport ship, crossing the treacherous Atlantic. The year is 1917. The Harlem Hellfighters, the 369th Infantry Regiment, are finally bound for France. But even at sea, the prejudice persisted. They were given the worst berths, the poorest food. They were soldiers, yet treated as second-class citizens. You might think the battle would begin when they reached the front. Not so. Their first fight was for respect. Upon arrival in France, the American Expeditionary Force, under General John J. Pershing, was still segregated. Pershing, a Southerner, initially intended to relegate the Hellfighters to labor battalions. He believed black soldiers were not fit for combat. This was the official stance. Think about the irony. These men had volunteered to fight for a country that denied them basic rights. They were eager to face the enemy, but first they had to face their own allies. And here's where it gets interesting. The French. They were desperate for troops. Their lines were thinning. They saw soldiers, not color. General Pershing, unwilling to integrate his forces, offered the 369th Regiment to the French army. A shocking move. He essentially disowned them. The French, however, welcomed them. They needed every man, and they needed them to fight. So on April 8, 1918, the 369th Infantry Regiment was officially transferred to the French 161st Division. They were given French uniforms, French weapons, and French command. This was an unprecedented decision in American military history. No other American unit was entirely placed under foreign command during the war. It was a clear message from Pershing. They are not our problem. Yet for the Hellfighters, it was liberation. They were finally seen as equals. They were finally given the chance to prove themselves. They were deployed to the front lines near the formidable Argonne Forest. This was a sector known for its brutal trench warfare. The conditions were horrific: mud, rats, constant shelling. But the Hellfighters adapted. They learned French tactics. They learned to fight alongside their new comrades. And they learned to wield a new weapon, the bolo knife. This heavy, single-edged blade, traditionally used in the Philippines, became their signature. You might wonder, why a knife in an age of rifles and machine guns? Because in the close quarters of trench warfare, a knife was silent. It was deadly. And it instilled fear. The German soldiers, initially dismissive, quickly learned to dread the Hellfighters. They called them Höhlenkämpfer, Hellfighters. The name stuck. This was not a compliment, but a mark of grudging respect. The 369th Regiment spent 191 days in continuous combat, longer than any other American unit. They never lost a man through capture. They never gave up a single inch of ground. Read that again. Not a single man captured. Not a single step backward. Their courage was legendary. And now pay attention to this. One of their own, Private Henry Johnson, would become a legend. On the night of May 14, 1918, Johnson was on sentry duty with Private Needham Roberts. They were attacked by a German raiding party of at least 12 men. Roberts was wounded. Johnson, despite being shot multiple times, continued to fight. He ran out of ammunition. He used his rifle as a club. And then he used his bolo knife. He fought off the entire raiding party, saving Roberts and repelling the attack. He killed 4 Germans and wounded many more. He sustained 21 wounds in the process. Think about what that means. 1 man against a dozen. Armed with little more than a knife, Johnson was awarded the Croix de Guerre with Palm, France's highest military honor. He was the first American to receive it. But his own country, the United States, would not recognize his heroism for nearly a century. Why this silence? Why this systemic denial of valor? The official records of the War Department, while acknowledging the incident, downplayed its significance. They never fully credited the Hellfighters' contributions. This part of history often remains buried. And what happened to Henry Johnson after the war? He returned home, a hero to the French, but a black man in segregated America. He struggled with his injuries, with poverty, and with the prejudice that still permeated his society. His story, a testament to incredible courage, became a dark irony. He fought for freedom abroad, only to find oppression at home. The very nation he bled for refused to acknowledge his sacrifice. His Medal of Honor was finally awarded posthumously in 2015, nearly a century after his heroic stand. A long overdue recognition. And what does this tell you about the official narrative of war? The truth, often, is far more complex and far more heartbreaking than what is written in history books. The Battle of the Bolo Knife was not just a fight against an enemy. It was a fight for dignity, a fight for recognition, a fight for a place in history that was denied for far too long. The Hellfighters proved their worth. They earned their legacy. But the fight for true equality, that battle continued long after the last shot was fired. That battle continued long after the last shot was fired. You might think the cheers of victory would silence the whispers of prejudice. But for Henry Johnson and countless others, the war at home was just beginning. He returned to Albany, New York, a celebrated hero in France, but still a black man in segregated America. His body, ravaged by 21 wounds, carried the physical scars of his heroism. His mind, however, carried deeper ones. He tried to resume a normal life. He sought work. He sought recognition from his own government. The official records from the War Department, while detailing his injuries, offered little in the way of support or lasting commendation. Think about what that means. A man who single-handedly fought off a dozen enemy soldiers, saving his comrade, was left to fend for himself. He found himself unable to work steadily due to his injuries. The constant pain, the lingering effects of gas attacks. These were not the glorious wounds of war in the eyes of his countrymen. They were simply inconvenient. He tried to speak about his experiences, to share the bravery of the Harlem Hellfighters. But the platforms were denied. His voice, once powerful in battle, was silenced at home. The official narrative of the Great War, as taught in American schools for decades, largely omitted the contributions of black soldiers. This omission was not accidental. It was systemic. It was a deliberate effort to erase their valor from history. And here's where it gets interesting. Johnson's French Croix de Guerre was a shining beacon. But it was a foreign medal. It did little to change the hearts and minds of a nation steeped in racial division. He died in 1929, just 32 years old. His death certificate listed myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle, as the cause. But many believed it was his war wounds and the despair of a nation's ingratitude that truly killed him. His story, a testament to incredible courage, became a dark irony. He fought for freedom abroad, only to find oppression at home. The very nation he bled for refused to acknowledge his sacrifice. His Medal of Honor was finally awarded posthumously in 2015, nearly a century after his heroic stand. A long overdue recognition. But for whom was it truly for? For Johnson, already gone? Or for a nation finally confronting its past? And what does this tell you about the official narrative of war? The truth, often, is far more complex and far more heartbreaking than what is written in history books. The Battle of the Bolo Knife was not just a fight against an enemy. It was a fight for dignity, a fight for recognition, a fight for a place in history that was denied for far too long. The Hellfighters proved their worth. They earned their legacy. But the fight for true equality, that battle continued long after the last shot was fired. You see, Johnson's struggle was not unique. Thousands of black veterans returned to a country that denied them housing, jobs, and even basic respect. The GI Bill, enacted in 1944, was designed to help veterans, but its benefits were often denied to black soldiers through discriminatory practices. Think about the sheer injustice. They faced the same bullets, the same gas, the same terror in the trenches, yet their post-war lives were starkly different. This part of history often remains buried. It's not the glorious image of returning heroes. It's the painful reality of systemic prejudice. The collective memory of a nation can be selective. It often chooses to remember the triumphs while conveniently forgetting the struggles. But the scars of that fight, the unseen wounds of inequality, linger for generations. They shape societies. They echo in the present. And for many, the battle for recognition is still being fought today. What does it mean to be a hero if your heroism is ignored by your own people? What does it mean to fight for freedom only to return to chains? The story of Henry Johnson and the Harlem Hellfighters is a powerful reminder that some battles are fought long after the guns fall silent, and some victories are never truly celebrated until long after the heroes are gone. Their legacy, a testament to their unwavering spirit, demands to be remembered. It demands to be seen. And it forces us to ask, what other truths lie hidden, waiting to be uncovered? Sometimes they are not buried by malice, but simply by the turning of pages, by the sheer weight of history. Let's return to Serbia, to Private Radoje Ljutovac, the man who achieved the impossible on September 30th, 1915. After the war, his fate was starkly different from Henry Johnson's. Ljutovac was celebrated. He was awarded the Kara Đorđe's Star with Swords, one of Serbia's highest military honors. He returned not to a nation that shunned him, but to his hometown of Trstenik as a respected citizen. He became a merchant. He lived a full life, passing away in 1968 at the age of 83. His story is told in Serbian schools. His modified canon is preserved in the Military Museum in Belgrade. Now, think about that for a moment. Two men, two acts of incredible courage against overwhelming odds. One is honored by his country, his name etched into national memory. The other, for nearly a century, is erased. His heroism denied by the very nation he fought for. The official records celebrate Ljutovac. The same kind of official records were used to deny Henry Johnson his benefits, his disability, his place in history. And here's the part nobody talks about. The only real difference between the two men's actions was the color of their skin and the nation for which they fought. Ljutovac was seen as a son of Serbia. Johnson was seen as a black man in an American uniform. That's it. Read that sentence again. That is the uncomfortable truth at the heart of their diverging legacies, yet their stories are echoes of each other. Two ordinary men, an artilleryman and a railway porter, who found themselves at the sharp end of history and refused to break. Their stories survived, one preserved in national folklore, the other resurrected by decades of tireless work by his family and fellow soldiers. But this forces a far more profound question. For every Henry Johnson whose story is finally brought to light, for every Radoje Ljutovac whose name is remembered, how many others are there? How many acts of impossible bravery occurred on a forgotten front, in a muddy shell hole, with no one left to tell the tale? History is written by the victors, but it is lived by ordinary people, in fleeting, desperate moments that never make it into a textbook. We build monuments to the unknown soldier, a powerful symbol, but it is an admission of our own failure to remember, a quiet acknowledgement of the countless stories that have dissolved into silence. Valor is not a medal. It is not a statue. It is a choice, a decision made in a single, terrifying heartbeat, when instinct screams to run, but something deeper commands you to stand. So what is the true measure of a hero? Is it the